No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Let me know if you can hear me in the comments. I just about started this stream without adding myself to the screen to begin with. So please, I'm inept. Make sure that you can hear me in the comments before I start going off on a spiel and no one can actually hear me or I'm muted or something. Yes, thank you very much, Michael. You can hear me. Great. Thank you. So today I'm going to have a little bit of a different way of doing things. Usually I talk for about 20 minutes. I don't know if I'm going to do that today. I don't know because I do have a topic that I want to talk about, and it's about breaking characters in a very special way. But I didn't have my normal Wednesday. I was literally sitting at the the mechanic all day with my car. Didn't have time to prepare for anything like I usually do, except for my normal preparation during the week. And quite honestly, I got there at what 10 and didn't leave till 5 because I was waiting for my car to be fixed. So I didn't get a whole lot done today, just to let you know. But I want to talk about breaking characters for a few minutes, anyways, and then maybe bring the chat in to get your guys' take on a couple of things. Now, let's take a look at who's here just to begin with. Michael is here. How you doing, Michael? Oh, I wish I had brought up my glasses, which I did not, unfortunately. But I'll do my best here. Manny is here. Final Fantasy is here. Tony is here. How you all doing? Okay, so for anybody who's new, if you're popping in for the first time, what I usually do is talk about my topic for a little bit, and you can put any comments you want in the chat, and I will answer them after I'm done with my spiel, which usually takes about 20 minutes. But as I said, probably shorter today. Anything at all you want to ask me about the topic today, about any of my crowdfunded comics, links for those, by the way, are in the description. And we watched a trailer for Crom the Destroyer just at the beginning here. That's my 45-second trailer, the second trailer for that book. And you can ask me about any of my other videos or anything else that you want to know, see if I can answer it before I leave tonight with our hour, before our hour is up. So what I wanted to talk about was breaking characters, and I'm not entirely sure why I started thinking about this week. It must have been a question somebody had asked me in the comments of my regular videos. But the reason why I have Punisher up there in the background is because I do believe that character was broken even before they tried to destroy the character within Marvel over the last year and a half or so. I think it was that they completely neutered the character. And I talked about this a while ago when it actually happened. And my question is this, okay? Is the character still the same character when you change fundamental things about the character? And it's not so much a retcon, it's a more editorial decision to change something about the character that, well, certainly I, as a fan, and maybe other people as fans would say, is essential to that character. Now, the reason, again, I chose Punisher was because for me, Punisher growing up, because, 80s and early 90s were when I bought comics just everything. I bought almost everything I could afford to buy. And Punisher comics there were so many of them coming out at that time. Because when I first got into comics, there was just the Punisher miniseries and the few, comics where he was in things like Spider-Man. You rarely ever saw him. And then all of a sudden the floodgates opened and you're reading all these Punisher books all the time and collecting them. So my question was this, because when I was, getting into that opening up of Punisher as a character, part and parcel of the essential character for Punisher was that he was a Vietnam vet. And to me, it was partly because I know this. It's partly because when you're growing up in the 80s, everything was about Vietnam. I mean, you got stories coming out your ears about Vietnam this and Vietnam that. I mean, think back to, Magnum PI, one of the biggest shows in the 80s, if you ask me, certainly. Uh, he was a Vietnam vet. You go to these Clint Eastwood movies that came out in the 80s, I think Heartbreak Ridge was one of them, but there's certainly more. And they're about this guy. He's a Vietnam vet. Or you had the early 80s movies where they're all going back to get POWs from Vietnam because they're still there. So it was part and parcel of the 80s that you had all these Vietnam stories. And I remember when the Nam came out, which was a comic. If you don't know, it's an 80s comic about Vietnam. There's no superheroes or anything like that, although the Punisher does make an appearance, I think around, I can't even remember. I'm going to guess around number 36, 38 or something like that, just as a soldier. But it was about soldiers in Vietnam. That's all it was. And it was a really big book when it came out. People just completely forget about the Nam now. They don't even realize that it was something. But again, part and parcel of the Punisher for me, when this whole thing about the Punisher exploded within, Marvel Comics 80s, 90s, was that he was a Vietnam vet. And when Marvel in the last, decade or so said, we have to revamp our entire timeline so that we can still have these characters and the timeline still makes sense. What did they do? Well, they revamped it so that all of the events within the key events that were usually historical events of those characters in their past changed to something else. And they basically made the Punisher a veteran of a fictitious war, which was called, if I remember correctly, the Sino-American War, which is basically a Chinese-American conflict, and they don't even have an actual place for it, if I can remember correctly. And I thought to myself, that breaks the character. If he's no longer a Vietnam vet, that's no longer the same character. And to me, that's a special kind of breaking of a character that I want to talk about tonight. And again, I don't even really have a point with this entire thing except to ask you in the comments and ask you the question and get your reaction to, does this break a character? Does this fundamentally change a character into something else? I know it's still the same intellectual property. Certainly, Marvel Comics is going to slap, the Punisher symbol still on that Punisher and say, yeah, it's the same character. But to me, if he's not a Vietnam vet, if they changed it to a different war, even if it's almost the exact same looking war, it's not an historical war. It's something you completely made up. That breaks the character to the extent that you're making a new character. And we see this, again, one of the reasons why I just fell out of reading comics to begin with in the mid 90s, say 96 or so, was because they tried to do Heroes Reborn. Where they took all of the Marvel characters and they revamped them in an Image style, and they gave them completely different backstories, even though it was somewhat similar. Now, everybody tells me that Marvel just did that as a lark, and they were just, putting this out there as an event. But honestly, quite honestly, when those books came out and I was picking them up at my comic store, everybody was told, as far as I know, and we were told in the comic shop, that this is Marvel now, that this is what they're going to do. All those old books are done with. They're no longer going to go back to that. That's gone. And this is the new Marvel. And it's going to be this way from now on. They're going to start with issue number 1. And I started reading these comics. And again, yes, you had the origins of Captain America and the origins of the Fantastic Four and Thor and all the rest. And they looked similar to the old Marvel stories, but they weren't the same. And they were, first of all, written by the Image creators who can't write their way out of paper bag. They just can't. They can draw like the wind, but they can't tell a good story. They're not writers. They're just not. And they just screwed everything up. But at the same time, I'm reading these ridiculous things like the Rob Liefeld Captain America, where what's the origin of Falcon? Falcon's new origin within the first couple of issues was that Captain America basically cut open his hand and allowed Falcon to drink some of his blood so that he would have some of the super soldier serum in him, and he became the Falcon. And it's just like, this is ridiculous. This broke comics for me, not just characters, because these were no longer the same characters. I'm saying all of those comics that I own, the continuity of Marvel, which is what Marvel was based on, it just went out the window. and this is your new continuity starting with this, these are not the same characters. To me, that's a broken character. And I guess the question can be asked in a similar way about something completely different when you look at DC. If you look at Crisis on Infinite Earths, where you have what, 3-4 Supermans running around at the same time. You got the gray-haired Superman and the Superman of their day, plus Superboy, at least 3. I think there was a 4th. I can't remember off the top of my head. But again, you would say all of these characters are the same intellectual property. Sure, you can say that you're metagaming there. They're the same intellectual property, but they're not the same characters. DC actually treated it in a reverse way than everybody else. They're saying, oh, no, we're changing the entire backstory of this character. It's the same character. Whereas DC would say, no, we're changing the entire backstory of this character. And to some extent, it becomes a new character because all of those Supermans were different Supermans. All of those Batmans that were there were different Batmans, just like the old Blue Beetle and the new Blue Beetle were different characters. Because I think they understood better than Marvel and better than a lot of people today, that when you fundamentally change something about the character's origin and how they became, let's say, a superhero, then you fundamentally change the character into a new character. And that's what they do at DC. Now, they've screwed it up completely over the last little while, I would say since the New 52, but we're not going to get into that today. But I do think they understand that if you change fundamental aspects about the origin of the character, you're making a new character, even though they're the same intellectual property. But to me, that's breaking a character. Maybe you can do it in a positive way like DC, or more times than not in a negative way that Marvel has done it over the years. And again, when I was thinking about this earlier in the week, I had a lot more examples than that under my belt. I don't remember them all off the top of my head right now. But that's the question I want to pose to you in the comments, and I'll try to get to the comments sooner this week rather than later, like I usually do. But does that fundamentally change a character into a different character? Again, if you take out Vietnam from the past of the Punisher, does that make the character a different Punisher? To me, yes. If you take out, let's say, again, what was it for Rob Liefeld's Captain America? I can't remember what ridiculous thing that they put into it to make him Captain America. But again, it was a retcon. You could use that word, but it doesn't fit exactly with what's going on. If you fundamentally change the origin of Captain America, is that the same Captain America? Again, I would say no. Just like the fact that the comic book Captain America is not the same as the MCU Captain America. No matter how many times they try to mesh the two together within the books ham-fistedly over the last 10 years, because they have tried to, and then the writers just screw it up. But again, not getting into that today. But again, you're making a completely different character. It's almost a retcon on steroids, because you're changing the fundamental origin of the character. And again, to me, if you're going to do that, you're making a completely different character. Because, well, I guess really thinking on my feet here, it would be the fact that if those characters made different decisions in their past, it wasn't just because there were different circumstances within their past, but those characters make different kinds of decisions, that would indicate to me that really, well, to break it down to a fundamental nature, they have a different soul. So if you're faced with the exact same choice, and each of these, let's say, Superman characters makes a different choice, to me, that fundamental change within choice is a fundamental change within what makes up the essence of that character or the essence of that person. So again, it can be something as small as a different choice, or as large as, we're going to change what kind of war this shaped this character, all these kinds of things. Okay, I'll start getting into the comments, and if I remember any of my examples that I was thinking about earlier on in the week, I might break off and talk about those for a few minutes as well. So apologies, because again, I am working without my glasses here because I forgot them downstairs, and I'm not going to take 5 minutes to go look for them, unfortunately. So I will do my best to get all of your comments. I'll have to put them up on the main screen so they're making big enough so I can see. Let's see who else is here. Vaz is here. How you doing, Vaz? He joins us from over at John's Long Box, where we were doing comic book team up just an hour ago. Vaz says DC Marvel love to break characters in a bad way. Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Somebody talking about Dan Slott. Sequential Treasure says, but Dan Slott said you can't break a character who's been around for decades because none of these stories matter. Yeah, well, that is flying in the face of everything that built Marvel Comics. Honestly, because continuity is what built Marvel Comics. And again, I always go back to that interview that Jim Shooter did when he was working for DC Comics at the time, and Marvel just came out of nowhere and started kicking their butts. And he knew it was because they had continuity. And he said, I want to do continuity. And the DC editors told him, no, we don't do that here. And then DC just got buried because Marvel was built upon continuity. And yet, it's a continuity that was loosely played with at times, but to say that none of the stories matter, no, that's fundamentally, again, breaking what made Marvel Comics. So Dan Slott, someone should break him. Yeah, someone should give him a swift kick in the pants. How's that? Let's see. Might make him smarter. Tony says, I stopped reading The Punisher after the Garth Ennis run. Rest in peace, Frank Castle. Yeah, again, a lot of people have their own definition of where I need to stop and why I think this character is broken. And again, that's part of the reason why I wanted to ask everybody this question. What is it that stops you from reading a character? What is it that fundamentally changes the character? Again, there are things that fundamentally change a character that don't include the breaking of the character that I'm talking about tonight. One of the things I loved, Tony Stark, Iron Man, all the way through the 80s, and the Armor Wars was really one of the best story arcs for comics of its time. It's really, really a great series of comics. But when they finally got to the point where Tony Stark uploaded his brain to a computer, and then they were downloading it back into his body, and he, as a computer generated brain, took over the programming from the programmer and did it himself from inside the computer. And I'm thinking to myself, no. I'm sorry, that's too much. Yeah, you just stepped over a line there. I just can't. I know Tony Stark is pompous to begin with, and it's part of his character, but that's pompous just to the moon. And I said to myself, I don't like that person. I don't like the person who, if they could do that, would be pompous enough to say, I'm going to recreate my entire self. Yeah. To me, that broke the character in a different way. But yeah, I know what you're talking about with Frank Castle and Garth Ennis. So let's see, scrolling down, we'll see who else we got here and what other comments we have. Scrolling down. There we go. Someone in the comments, Sequential Treasure comes in and saves me my poor memory. He says, Punisher was in the NAM 52 and 53. Thank you very much. I was off by about 20 comics. Oh, I said 63, didn't I? Oh, maybe. Well, I was off, certainly. Let's see. Scrolling down. Final Fantasy is here and says, the Punisher is who comes to mind as the quintessential anti-hero archetype. Again, I suppose I haven't really talked that much about anti-heroes in my time here on my channel, but the way that a lot of people talk about anti-heroes, there is really a whole bunch of different ways that you can define what an anti-hero is. And I try to go back to the oldest way of people defining an anti-hero, in so much as that he does heroic things, even though he doesn't will them to happen, as in to say it becomes almost something accidental. So I suppose you could put Punisher in that category. Let's see, scrolling down. Scrolling down. Hondo is here, and he says he doesn't consider him an anti-hero. Well, I'm right there with you in some of that, because a lot of people think of Conan as an anti-hero, and I don't think of Conan as an anti-hero, just because of the way the Robert E. Howard stories came out and how he tried to create the character to begin with. And I've gone over that probably a dozen times in my live streams. But yeah, I don't think of him as an anti-hero. I think of him as a hero because he ends up as a lawful good king. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion to be had about some of these characters and whether they are anti-heroes or not. Let's see, scrolling down. Sequential Treasures also says Marvel doesn't see continuity as canon as important. That's all that you really need to say. They are wrong, but it's what they think. Yeah. I think it's what they think because they painted themselves into a corner, quite honestly. They painted themselves into a corner because they had these characters which sold really, really well, and they just couldn't let them age. And when they couldn't let them age, they've been around for so long that you simply could not put that much history into a understandable way of continuity, of looking at continuity. You just couldn't. And so they had to do what they did because, again, they painted themselves into a corner. Now, whether it's the right call or not, I don't know. Because, again, I can see why they would want to keep, let's say, Peter Parker around for so long. But again, not letting him age at all, that was the problem. Because you could have let him have aged, slowly. There's plenty. You live in a sci-fi fantasy world of comic books. There's ways around this. If they were good writers, they would have found ways around it. But to take away the fact that, he got married and he would never have kids and all this kind of stuff, I think that's what, fundamentally broke the character, in the fact that they would never let him age. And I think that's what Dan Slott said. He wanted to make sure that he would go back to that old character. And no, you got to let them age. And to DC's credit, they did do that to some extent, having to revamp the character every once in a while. It kind of screwed up a lot of things in different ways, but they tried to do that. Because there is the old Superman, the gray-haired Superman who married Lois Lane, who had children with Lois Lane. That character does exist. And then they re-upped the entire universe, and then the character isn't focused on anymore. But yeah, I really think that Marvel painted themselves into a corner by the way that they got trapped by their own products. So that's why they abandoned their continuity. It was the wrong call. Whether or not they could have made any better call, that's a can of worms in itself. Let's see. Final Fantasy says the core of an anti-hero is that they do heroic deeds, but they aren't restricted by moral codes. They have a sheer commitment to protecting life, but they aren't above protecting people either. Not sure I see the distinction there, but that would, excuse me for 1 second, mosquito in my face. It wouldn't be what I would normally talk of as a hero, because it wouldn't be heroic, because the virtues all trickle down to the last virtue, which is temperance, which reorders all of the other virtues so that they work together correctly. And if you do what is considered an heroic deed for the wrong reason, then it's not actually a heroic deed. So I guess if you want to define an anti-hero that way and put that into, I suppose that could fit into the definition that you're giving Final Fantasy. It would take a little bit more thought on my part, but thank you very much for your definition. Interesting way to think about it. Scrolling down. Final Fantasy also says, because anti-heroes know they are honorable people. Yeah, well, that's where I would disagree with you, because if you follow something to its extreme, to the exclusion of something else, let's say, of course, following justice to its extreme so that it becomes vengeance, then that's not an honorable thing, because again, honor, I always go back to the Platonic definition of honor. Honor consists in following the better and in doing our utmost to affect the betterment of the worse when it admits of being bettered, which is to say, if you take that line of thinking and look at it really closely, is that there is a best because you have a scale of what is good and better. And the only way that you can have a scale of what is good and better is if you know what is best, and everything comes downwards from what is best, and you can categorize them as better, good, better, best, or bad, good, better, best. And the thing is that honor consists in always choosing the highest thing that you can grab at, the highest good that you can tangibly hold on to. And a higher good would be to, practice the virtues in a way that is temperate, which is to say that you can't do an extreme measure of justice without it turning into vengeance. If you cross that line, it's no longer honorable. You're not serving the honorable thing. You're serving something baser. That would be where I disagree with that. Scrolling down. Let's see. Sequential Treasures also says, when you alter a character's backstory, you change it from that character, no matter what else you retain of the original character. Yeah, that's really the nub of what I was trying to say, I think. Thank you very much, Sequential Treasures. And I'm trying for the life of me to think about a couple of other characters from Marvel and DC that everyone would know where they did this. Alessandro's here. How you doing? He says, RJ, this reminds me of the ship of Theseus paradox. I don't remember that paradox off the top of my head. You'd have to remind me what that is, Alessandro. Scrolling down. Zach Dan is here. How you doing? Hundo says, Superman being from an alien planet, not being called Krypton, doesn't really break the character when everything else is the same. I don't think the war needs to be called Vietnam. Okay. Well, again, I don't know how I'll ask you this question with some tact, Hondo. How old are you? Because again, growing up and having so many stories about Vietnam stuck in your face in the 80s anyways, it made it something very unique, and really within history, the Vietnam War is very unique. So it's more the fact that because it's a tangible, real war, you can, let's say, extrapolate from that tangible, real thing in reality that you know about and that you know a lot about, because again, 80s, so many stories, and extrapolate from that what kind of character this is and what his motivation is, where it comes from, why he has this kind of drive. Whereas when you make it a fictitious war, all of that is gone. It may be, yeah, he's a soldier, and yeah, he has these drives because he was a soldier, but then you got to explain all of that. And if you don't explain it, then it's not there. And if it's not there, then it does dilute much of what you can put down in your mind as the headcanon for why this character is doing that they do as you read, which is what you do need until they come out with, their own story to say XYZ within their past. So to me, that's the fundamental difference. Let's see. Scrolling down. Oh, here we go. I think he answered my question, the very next comment. But I'm not a Gen Xer, so maybe Vietnam means something more to you guys other than an historical event, which is all it is to me. Now, it's more than an historical event. Although I don't remember any of the Vietnam War, I certainly was alive during part of, when it was when it's happening. So it certainly affected people around me. It affected, where we lived and all these kinds of things. And I'm certain it affected how we grew up. Let's see, scrolling down. Tony says, if you are still emotionally invested in an IP that is owned by a corporation, you have to prepare yourself for the inevitable that it is going to eventually suck. All right, Tony. I honestly agree with that point. I think there are some corporations that, I think Marvel, it was a corporation, before it was sold in the 90s, but it was, it was Stan Lee's corporation. So it was held on tightly by the reins of one hand. And you can trust more a corporation like that, we'll say. I don't say you can trust a corporation like that, but you can trust them more. But yeah, when it becomes something truly corporate, where they're just, it's an entity unto itself, and there is no one to guide, there is no one to hold the reins, then yeah, it's going to die. Let's see. Scrolling down. Zach Dan says, so do you think origin is an essential trait versus an accidental trait? No, I think heroism is an essential trait. I don't think origin is an essential trait because eh, I think the origin of a character, and just like the origin of real people and their heroism, is something accidental. Why? Because everyone, in my estimation of the world and how I see things, and going through all the things that I've gone through, and understanding, philosophy and theology and all that kind of stuff, I would say that each and every one of us are presented with the opportunity to have an origin time after time after time to be heroic. You're given an opportunity day after day. Which one you choose is up to you, and it usually depends on how prepared you are. So it's not that this origin is going to change the heroic nature within you. It's just going to bring alive the heroic nature within you. And that's the essential trait. Because I would say everyone wants to be a superhero. Everyone wants to um, be heroic in their own life, even if it's not super, as in I have superpowers. It's that I've done something exceptional and it's heroic, which means to say that it's not about me. It's about the, again, essence of the thing, the principle of the thing. So yeah, I think the heroism is the essential part, and the origin is not the essential part. But again, that being said, um, it helps inform your reading and your ability to see how this character thinks, and how they think and how they will is something that does touch on heroism, because again, the will is an essential part of a human being, and it's essential part of what builds your character. And again, um, to understand why a person wills what they will, why they choose to do something at that moment, to be heroic at that moment, particularly, that's really where the pavement, the rubber hits the pavement. That's where you have a cross section of both of these things. That's the best as I can think about it right now, and explain it. I'm sure there's a bit of a contradiction in there, but I can't think of what it is right at the moment. So let's see. Scrolling down. Michael is, of course, here and says it's kind of like how the movie A-Team was Iraq War II veterans, while the TV A-Team was Vietnam vets. It's just not the same. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. To me, again, let's go to television and movies, like you're talking about, Michael. To me, when they redid Star Trek and they, created an entire separate timeline with Spock coming from the other timeline, and then that one was completely abandoned, and it fundamentally changed the origins of these characters and how their story progressed, I guess you would have to say. It's not the same character. They're not the same characters. Chris Pine's, I think it's Chris Pine. Chris Pine's James T. Kirk is not the original James T. Kirk. He's not the William Shatner James T. Kirk. He's just not. Those are two different characters. They have the same name. They have similar things within their stories, but they're two different characters. And to me, it's not just where the stories went. It's not just what the writers did with it. It's that they're two different characters. They're two different people. I guess we'll put it that way. They're two different people. When I'm talking about characters, I think of them as people, right? They're two different people. Let's see. Scrolling down. Rex is here and says, this is why Dan Slott is on my never list. Yeah, I can see that. Which I was just thinking as I was scrolling down there, I think there was a movie that actually tried to explore this exact thing. What was it? Dark City, where they would change people's minds, and their basically take different human beings, and they were all part of an experiment, and they changed everything that they would think of as their origin, and to see if they still acted the same way as the other people would act, and whether or not you are made up entirely of your past actions, or whether there was something more. I think it was Dark City. So not the best movie in the world, nor the best exploration of that kind of thinking, if you ask me, but certainly it's one way to crack into that idea that I'm talking about tonight. To me, there is an essential part of who you are. That's what your soul is. Everybody has a soul. And yeah, to me, the answer would be no, it's not just what makes you up. Um, yeah, I mean, that is to say your history, what happened to you in time is not the only thing that makes you up. It has to do with who you are essentially. Again, that would be a soul, and that's connected to the will. Let's see, scrolling down, scrolling down. Calliope is here and says, so suddenly the super soldier serum can be passed on vampirically. That is stupid. Yeah, that's what I said when I was reading that comic in the 1996, 7. Yeah, with I think, well, Rob Liefeld was certainly doing the main art for that book, but I think he was the writer as well. It was stupid. It was stupid. I completely agree. Let's see. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Rex says, RJ, quick question. Do you think certain characters only work in the time period they were created in or written into? Yes, absolutely. 100% Rex. I do believe there are some characters like that. I think a good example of a character like that would be Ghost Rider, because there are different iterations of Ghost Rider which have different connections to different people. You know, there's Johnny Blaze and there's Danny Keach. What's his last name? Anyways, and there's the old Ghost Rider who rode on a horse. These are different characters, and I think that's something that Marvel finally did right with that character. I think that character in the whole, you know, satanic thing that was going on in the 60s and the 70s, it kind of made sense as Ghost Rider then, but when you get into the late 80s, 90s Ghost Rider, that's a fallen angel. It's something completely different, and it more suited the time. And I don't know. I wouldn't say I don't think. I would say I don't know if that character still resonates today or not. But I don't think that character from the 70s as Ghost Rider resonated into the 80s and 90s. It just didn't. So there are some characters. Certainly, I wouldn't say that for all characters, but I would say yes, there are some characters written like that. Let's see. Scrolling down. And I think honestly, you open up a good question here, Rex, as well. It's the fact that some characters are that way because they're so tied to something within the actual world, an event that people think of as spectacular in the moment, because we have this absurd notion right now. It's what's it called off the top of my head? Oh, good heavens. It's like a presentism. It's to say it's happening now, therefore it's the most important thing, and it's more important than anything that happened in the past. No, it isn't. It's some small little thing that you think is important right now because it's affecting your life, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, no one's even going to remember that this actually happened. So if you make that fundamental to your character and what the character is about, then that character is going to be easily forgotten. And that's the problem with a lot of comics right now, because again, they're making the origin. They are deliberately tying the origin and the motivation of all of these characters within comics now to this ridiculous movement that's going on right now with social justice. And they think that, because this is the future, this is going to be just the origin point of every great thing that happens in the future. When I'm looking at it, and everyone else, I think now, is looking at it going, no, it's going to be forgotten in 10 years. It's going to be laughed at in 15 years. It's going to be something that people look back and say in 20 years, what were they, crazy? And if you tie a character to those things, those characters are going to die pretty soon. So let's actually hope that that's the case, because a lot of these characters that they have out today just don't deserve to still be on the stands. Let's see. Zaktan says, major character trait swaps, or when a good character starts down the path of vice. Not sure where you're going with that, Zaktan, but yes. I think that, the character of a hero, as I've said a lot of times on my channel, is a person who gets knocked down but gets back up. But you have to do that in a very specific way. And if you repeat it too many times, it becomes something in it, something in itself unheroic. I remember watching these stupid television shows from the 90s where you would start watching the series and it's about, college or teenage kids or usually college kids or something like that. And they would make these stupid mistakes. And then you would say, oh, well, they're going to learn. But then after 4 or 5 seasons, they're still making the same stupid mistakes. And I'm saying to myself, no, you don't get excused anymore. You went through this 5 different times by now. If you have not learned, you're an idiot. You're choosing the wrong path of not learning from your mistakes. So, yeah, that's what a hero in a heroic story needs to do. I think it needs to see your hero get knocked down over and over again, but not in the same way over and over again, because again, if they don't learn from their mistakes, they cease to be heroic. So going down the path of vice is one of those things which you can handle in a delicate manner and actually makes the character better. But again, you can't trust anything that would come out today because they don't even know what vice is. They call vice virtue and virtue vice. Let's see, scrolling down. Sequential Treasure says, what makes me stop reading a character is when you change something fundamental about this, like Spidey's deal with the devil on One More Day, for example. Yeah. Again, to me, that's an unheroic thing. The deal with the devil was very much a selfish thing. It broke Peter Parker as being a hero, in my eyes, certainly. So yeah, completely agree with you there, Sequential Treasures. Scrolling down. Alessandro says, RJ, you talked about what progressives would call a hero, but what is your idea of a villain? Give me 1 second here. I just have to switch where I'm recording from just for 1 second. Whew, it's getting hot here today. Not as hot as it was last week. Hopefully I didn't mess up my my mic. What is my definition of a villain? Well, the definition of a villain is a paragon of vice. That's exactly what it is. Since a hero is a paragon of virtue, the opposite of that is a paragon of vice. And that's what a villain is someone who chooses the vicious thing. That's what vicious actually means. It's full of vice. So your villains are vicious. And that is to say, well, there's different ways of being vicious. There's different ways of choosing vice. It's not just a rejection of virtue. It's a rejection sometimes of the fundamental things that build up virtue and make it real, and a fundamental rejection of reality. And part of that would be selfishness. I'm right. I'm the only thing that can define what the truth is. That kind of thing. So, yes, that's how I would define what a villain is. Scrolling down. Let's see what other we have here. Honduran says, anti-hero is someone that does no. An anti-hero is someone that can do bad but does good when the chips are down. Anti-villain is someone that can do good but does bad when the chips are down. Okay. That's an interesting take on it. I'll have to think about that. Let's see. Scrolling down, Tony says, RJ, would you consider Lucifer as the first liberal? Let me put it this way, Tony. Let's say, guru of liberalism since the 1960s declared that Lucifer was the first liberal. That'd be Saul Alinsky, who Hillary Clinton worked for. She was his protege, and he did his quote unquote community organizing. And that's what you see all around you today in these liberal cities. It's basically the community organizing of Saul Alinsky. And he dedicated his book of community organization to the first rebel, which would be Lucifer. And he saw that first rebel as a good thing. And yes, he is the origin point of a lot of what we see around us today, and you label as liberalism. You just do. That's pure history right there. Scrolling down. Let's see. Another definition of an anti-hero is someone that isn't a hero, but they are a jerk. Well, I wouldn't consider a jerky hero to be an anti-hero. quite honestly, I wouldn't. I think that to some extent, some versions of Batman is a jerk, but he's still a hero. So I wouldn't think of him as an anti-hero just because he's a jerk. There are plenty of reasons to be a jerk. There's plenty of reasons for people to see you being a jerk. I actually had a conversation about this today. Uh, Someone was describing me to someone else, and they said, "Oh yeah, he's a jerk," but he doesn't mean to be a jerk. And that's not the first time people have described me that way. They said he just comes off as very gruff, so he comes off as being a jerk, but he's not really a jerk. So I don't know. Perhaps that conversation is coloring my response there, Honduran. Let's see. Scrolling down. Rex says, one reason I asked my question is that some people try to adopt Sherlock Holmes into modern times, but the problem is that his methods are standard for police and detective work. I never thought of it that way. I think that I don't think that they're the standard of police work, honestly, still now today, because he did what he does is deductive reasoning, and I don't think what a lot of police work is deductive reasoning today. Uh, the Sherlock Holmes deductive reasoning is very much a product of Victorian age thinking, so it has its own flavor to it that is outside of what we would see as science and the science of police work today. And that would be my take on it. Whether or not you can take Sherlock Holmes and put him in a different time period and have him work, I really don't think that's the case. Again, I think these characters are different characters. Let's see. Scrolling down. Oh, look, we have J.R. T.R.R. Jolkin here. I have to make sure that I get that right. How you doing, Mr. Jolkin? Let's see. Scrolling down. Honduran is continuing, saying another definition of an anti-hero is a hero that kills. Again, I wouldn't say that every hero. I mean, again, I would say that there are police and that there are military who are heroes and they kill. I mean, even if they did kill someone, you're in the military, you're in a war, you can be a hero. Yeah, you're killing people. So I wouldn't say that that makes you an anti-hero in any way, quite honestly. Whether or not that translates into superhero, anti-hero, that's a different question. Let's see, scrolling down. Zach10 says, it's difficult. Aging the characters makes better continuity, but when they try to do a pass the torch, they always mess it up. Well, they do always mess it up. And I think they do always mess it up because you need a heroic exit for a hero. Quite honestly. That's why I think that Wally West is always my Flash. Not only because that Flash book was so important to me as I bought it from my comic store when it first came onto the stands, but because Barry Allen died in a heroic way within the Crises on Infinite Earths, and he should have stayed dead. Why? Because that hero had a heroic death, and the passing of the torch made complete sense when it went to Wally West at that time. But yeah, they do mess it up because, again, a lot of these people are talking or thinking about creating a good story, not thinking about creating a good hero. Let's see, scrolling down. Alessandro says, RJ, the difference between us and the progressives on this topic is that they see things superficially. For example, for them, Superman is just the costume, not the character. Yes, but they also think of, I would agree with that because they think of people in that way. They think that there is nothing essential for a person. I mean, I did at least one video talking about, an interview done by Marika Tamaki, where she literally said, people are nothing. People are nothing, and you're just a monkey that mimics the things around you. That's the only thing that makes you up. You're essentially nothing. And she literally said that within the interview. The people are essentially nothing. And again, I think she's an actually good writer. But when you have that kind of mindset, there's nothing good you can write. That is to say, she's good at the technical skill of writing, but she has no understanding of life in order to write something that has an impact. So yeah, I agree. That's what progressives think, not just for characters, but for human beings as well. And that's why, by the way, they can just, condemn people to death willy-nilly. Um, you know, as we've seen within the Soviet Union or things like that, where large swaths of people, millions upon millions, were just sacrificed for the good of society. Why? Because you're essentially nothing. So that really doesn't matter. Scrolling down, Honduran says, RJ, I disagree about Conan. I think he is a villain who eventually becomes a hero-ish. Well, yes, I would agree with that point, Honduran, because that was part of the character, is that he doesn't start off as a hero. It's the journey of a man becoming a hero. But at the same time, that I always think of it in terms of being a hero, because the very first story that Robert E. Howard wrote for Conan was one where he was a king, because none of those stories of Robert E. Howard are actually done in a sequential way. They just jump all over the life of Conan, back and forth, as he put them out. But the very first story was the almost end of Conan, and he was a lawful good king at that time. So when you go back after that point and see that he's not a hero, which he isn't, I completely agree. And some of those stories, he's not a hero, but he's a man on the journey of becoming that hero at the end, which was the very first story of Robert E. Howard, where he is again a lawful good king. So yeah, agreed. Scrolling down. Honduran finishes his thought and says, Conan is only a king in like 3 of the 17 to 19 stories. Yeah, but again, my point is that the first story was a king. So that's where Robert E. Howard had him eventually end up in his mind before he even wrote any of the stories. Let's see. Scrolling down. Vaz says, Conan is a pragmatist. However, he still wants to do good over evil. Well, I would say, again, he's more than just a pragmatist. What is the story? The Tower, Red Tower, or I can't remember. Oh, what the heck is the name of that story? Anyways, the Red Citadel. But anyways, he is a king at that point as well, and he's defeated, and he's defeated on the battlefield, and they say to him, "Listen, we will give you riches beyond your imagination, and you can just leave. We're not even going to kill you. We'll give you everything that you could ever want as a barbarian, riches, everything. Just get up and leave." And he says, "No." He says, "I won't do that. I saved these people from a tyrant. I will not abandon them to another tyrant." So again, I think that he does will to do good, certainly when he's a king. Let's see. Baz continues. Women and wine are his kryptonite. Well, I won't disagree there, Baz. Alessandro says, RJ, the progressives can't create a consistent character because they think there is no difference between truth and lies. Well, yeah. Well, they don't believe the truth actually exists. There is nothing but lies. There's nothing but basically, the way I think about it all the time is just something bobbing on the water. Your life is you bobbing on the water. There's nothing to tether to. There is no port. There is no island. There is nothing on the horizon. There's just endless water, and you bob along on it and crash into other things as you do so. And again, that way of thinking about a human being and the progressive way of thinking about a human being belittles the way of thinking about the will so much so that it makes it insignificant as to non-existent. And again, you don't have the will, you don't have a hero. Scrolling down. Rex says, RJ, the ship of Theseus paradox is basically, if you change everything about something, is it still the same thing? That's kind of, because I was thinking of I can't remember, the pre-Socratic philosophers that asked, can you step in the same river twice? That's what I was thinking about. Yeah. If you change everything about something, is it still the same thing? Well, again, here's the point. I think that the paradox, again, off the top of my head, doesn't consider and makes it irrelevant is the fact that I am talking about human beings and you simply cannot change everything about a human being. You just simply can't. Because again, you, as far as I'm concerned, and the way I write characters is that you have a soul. It's an immortal thing and it's an unchangeable thing. So you can't change everything about that character. And again, I honestly think that that's what that story in Dark City was really about: is that do people have souls? Um, and yeah, if you have a thing, sure, you can change everything about a thing. You can make it something completely different, but it's a thing. It's not a person. Um, and that fundamental difference between those two things is where that paradox falls apart logically, if you ask me. Let's see. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Final Fantasy says honorable people, horrible people, not honorable, RJ, but you are not wrong about what you said. Oh, okay. My apologies. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Rex says it's not how someone starts that determines who they are. It is the choices they make. Well, yes, but again, I would say choices you make depend on your will. Your will depends on essentially who you are and what you are. And again, I would say those things are unchangeable parts of you. They just don't make up. There's something that exists apart from this mortal coil. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Honduran says, I especially like Howard's rant about how great white people are at the end of one of Solomon's stories, like I think Wings in the Night, whichever one where they fight the vampires in Africa. Oh yeah. Oh, I freely admit, Robert E. Howard is a product of his time. You'll notice that within the stories, there's a lot of apes and monkeys and monkey people and things like that. Why? Because it's just starting to percolate into the mind of people when he was growing up, and the stories that he would be reading as a child percolate into the conscious mind of the everyday person, the idea of evolution. And he thought of, you can see the marks of evolutionary thinking, early evolutionary thinking, from a layman perspective, from someone who's just not a scientist, running straight through Robert E. Howard stuff. It's just undeniable, and it's an idea that evolution can happen, within hundreds of years, turning a human being into an ape or an ape into a human being. So yeah, he is definitely a product of his time. I'm not gonna fault him for that. I think it actually makes the stories more rich in the fact that he didn't, like today, make excuses for anything. He didn't try to say this and that and the other thing. That is to say, everybody else is wrong. He just went with the flow of, which is basically what his character, especially Conan, does. He goes with the flow of what everybody is doing right now. And again, that I think does enrich the character today in the fact that I want to still see that kind of a character, but I understand that either there's a world that exists where evolution works differently, or there's something about it that the stories don't get right, and then I'm going to come up with ideas in my head about what actually is going on there. So I love stories that make me think. I love stories that make me try to make connections between things in my mind. To me, those are the best stories. And I think that's part of why when I ran into Robert E. Howard, long time after he had died, that they stuck in my head. Let me see. I think I skipped somebody. Michael says, let's see. I'm not entirely sure if this comment is for me, but I will try and get through it. Dark chocolate milk, chocolate white chocolate are all chocolate, but they're also different. And that difference is what matters. It all comes from the same source, but the final product is different. Okay. Well, I guess you'd be making that comparison with, let's say, different Supermans. Let's see. Alessandro says, RJ, I noticed that for progressives, the only vice they condemn is greed. For example, in the woke cartoon, uh, Helavula, Haluva Boss, the princes of hell who embody the seven deadly sins are good guys except greed. Quite honestly, Alessandro, to make a statement on what you have said there, I would say that I think they do protest too much in the fact that the only reason why they want to portray greed as a bad thing is because they're so greedy. Quite honestly, that's it. They don't actually think of greed as a bad thing. They just don't want to appear greedy themselves because that's what they are. I think progressivism and really any form of ideology that denies what truth is essentially based on a prideful way of looking at the universe where I matter more than the truth. Again, going back to Plato, and his statements in the laws, that's what he would consider the greatest evil, where a person values what is their own above what is true, and that's a greedy thing to do. It's quite simply that's what it is. Let's see. Sound Engraver is here. How you doing, Sound Engraver? Thank you very much for the $1 super chat. I always like to give a shout out to Sound Engraver. She has a channel, although I usually say go over and take a listen to the Sound Engraver's channel because she does a little bit more concentrating on musical and different aspects of the arts, but in the same vein of what I'm doing. But Sound Engraver might be changing the format of her channel. Not entirely sure, Sound Engraver. I didn't see the entire live stream that you talked about that. So we will stay tuned for what happens with Sound Engraver's channel. Scrolling down, Alessandro also says, RJ, since you've enlightened me about woke ideology, I started to recognize its presence in older media too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. That's one of the things I always like to make clear. The point I like to make clear is that I don't want to bring back the 80s. I love the 80s. I think 80s comics are the best. I think 80s movies are the best, but I don't want to bring back the 80s because, again, like I said about bringing back the 90s, the 90s led not just accidentally to where we are right now, it led where the only destination is right now. And so did the 80s because this stuff was there and it was there so thick that, yeah, it eventually led to where we are right now, and this is the only destination. So I say take the good things from the 80s, and I say there's less good things in the 90s because they weren't as really, we'll say, positive about how they created. But yeah, take the best things from what you have in the past and then take them into the present and make them alive. I don't want to relive the 80s. I want to relive the good things that were in the 80s. Because yeah, there's plenty of progressivism in it, and you go back and watch these things because I do that often now. I go back and watch old television shows, old movies, things like that. Yeah, you can see this progressivism in there, very, very much so, and that's why I quite honestly think that we will get to a point where finally this mentality will be defeated. But whether or not that's now, whether we got to that critical point, I'm hedging my bets and saying that it does look like we're there and that it eventually will be overthrown and that we will go back to a sanity and a way of living as human beings that, while never perfect, will just honor what reality is. I think we're possibly at that point in history because that history began, 800 years ago, small little roots, and it grew and grew into this thing that we have to deal with today, this noxious weed. That's one of the things I like to think about it in that terms, because whenever I do, I started this a long time ago. I would read philosophers and thinkers throughout the ages, certainly over the last, let's say 800 years. And then I eventually drew a chart, which was more or less I don't know what you call it. It's like a family tree of ideas. And I would follow these family tree of ideas and I would put a new thinker on there and how they're connected to this thinker and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it goes a long ways back, and yes, you can see it in those kinds of even the older entertainment that we have. Let's see. Michael says Carter Slade was the Ghost Rider who rode the horse. Oh, there you go. I did not know his name. Scrolling down. Excuse me. I think, well, I've been here for more than an hour. I should possibly speed up a little bit about reading the comments here. Alessandro also says, for instance, during David Tennant's era in the Doctor Who series, there's an episode where the Doctor encounters an alien minotaur that preys on people's faith. Okay. Well, apologize, Alessandro, but I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to there. I don't watch Doctor Who a whole lot, but also don't understand the connection to what we're talking about. My apologies. Honduran says, they're not really pro-gluttony. That's just wanting fat people to feel good. They're just pro-selfishness. They're pro-selfishness, which, gluttony is part of selfishness. Greed is part of selfishness. So yeah. Let's see. Alessandro also says, in this episode, the Doctor remarks that fear is the foundation of all religions. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, you can see that type of thinking in small and little ways. And again, for me, it started to come to a head within even just the mid 90s, where I was like, no, I'm abandoning this form of entertainment because it's just become so corrupt with these ideas. And over again, it started with, this and that, and it just grew and grew. Let's see. Let's see. Sectan says, presentism is temporal snobbery. Yeah, basically. It's just basically saying that I'm the best because I live now. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. George is here. How you doing, George? George says, hey to all, what did I miss? We're talking about what breaks a character, whether or not changing fundamentally the choices of the character or the backdrop of the character, and what makes them a character breaks the character to the extent that it makes something new, even though it might be the same intellectual property. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Miss Maria is here. How you doing, Miss Maria? Just because Miss Maria is here, I'll have to mention Aristotle. Why? Because Miss Maria has once said that every video I do, I have to mention Aristotle. And I have not mentioned Aristotle yet today. So, Miss Maria, I'm mentioning Aristotle just for you. Go read Aristotle. Anyways, Miss Maria says, I can't handle watching Spider-Man because it's so depressing. Honestly, I've come to the same conclusion about so much media right now, Miss Maria, is that I'm trying to find the positive things. And I go from decade to decade. I go from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. And you can see the difference between the positive nature of some entertainment. Now, again, not saying it's all great and that everything should be accepted. I'm saying that it's much more positive in the 80s than it was in the 70s, than it was in the 90s. And I'm going back and I'm saying, some of my friends are watching 90s television and saying, let's watch this television show over again. And I'm going, yeah, I don't want to watch that anymore. It's really not that positive. And I want to go back to, that's why I said, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I said, yeah, some things are campy. To me, the difference between the 80s and the 90s is that the 80s does look a little bit campy. Why? Because it was you and your friends laughing at something, whereas you get to that was the 80s, whereas you get to the 90s and it's you and your friends laughing at someone, or you laughing at one of your friends and they laughing back at you. There's a difference there. And the difference is that when you're laughing at something and it's not at some person, you have a much broader scope of what you're trying to do. And that broader scope does, to some extent, make it campy because it's open to all. And I think that I personally, certainly, I would say, am going back to the more and more positive forms of entertainment. Let's see. Scrolling down. I'm going to see if I can get through some more of these comments with speed. Let's see. Scrolling down. There's a lot of crosstalk, so I'm going to have to go through a couple of these comments here. George does make a good point. Captain Marvel is a villain. Yes, current Captain Marvel is a villain, quite honestly. Scrolling down. Jude says, that wasn't the question. What is the progressive idea of a villain? The progressive idea of a villain is a hero, is a traditional virtuous hero. Pure and simple. Scrolling down. So Alessandro also repeats, I was referring to the idea of villains that progressives have. Yeah. Again, the idea of what progressives think of as a villain is a virtuous hero, because it goes back to all of those things that they hate, all of the things I'm always talking about the human nature, about the triumphant nature of the will, about human spirit, human nature, and the soul. Goes back to truth, all these kinds of things that virtue just is founded upon. Let's see. Scrolling down. Alessandro says the Enlightenment was the initial germ. Well, there is precursors to the Enlightenment. I would say Enlightenment was probably where the plant broke through the surface of the ground and started to sprout up. There are roots besides that. Go back to even Occam. You can go back to Occam very easily and see that kind of stuff in there. Let's see, it's going down. Honduran says, RJ, I don't agree with those last two definitions of anti-hero. I was just saying them because of how I see people use the term oftentimes. Heroes can kill and be jerks without being anti-heroes. Agreed. Scrolling down. Rex says, and yet Jeff Johns brought back Barry Allen because, and quite a number of other people at DC considered Barry as the definitive Flash. Again, those are the people that kill comics. Those are the people that kill stories. If you can't let it go, again, let me put it this way. If you're an actual human being, you grow old and you die. If you are a character, you're supposed to be, as I always say, a story is supposed to be a representation of reality. That's what Aristotle says. There you go, Miss Maria. That's what Aristotle says. It's part of how we have told stories within, at the very least, Western culture for thousands upon thousands of years. And so a character should also be a reflection of reality. It should be a reflection of a person, a real person. It's not just a collection of ideas. As I always say, progressives don't actually present a real person. They present an idea in a mask. And it's the mask of being a character. It's not a character, it's an idea that looks like a character. But an actual character is a representation of a person. An actual person grows old and dies. If you can't get to that point within your storytelling, get out of my way. I don't want to read your story, because it's gonna, if it's not garbage now, it's going to end up being garbage. And so many of these writers can't get to that point. They can't mature to that point. Really, that's what it is. And that's what we see around us today with all these writers. They're just childish individuals who can't understand being an adult, actually growing up. And if they can't understand that, they can't understand human development. You can't understand human development. You can't write a good character. That character does not have character unless they can understand what it is to be human. Sorry for going off on that rant, but yes, thank you very much, Rex, for that enlightening comment. Let's see. Zach Dan says, in general, I think an anti-hero could easily be on the bad side because they have typical villain traits, but because of circumstances, they are on the right side of the story. Yeah, that would basically be what I was talking about too, Zach Dan. Yeah, they do these things and they turn out well, even though they don't particularly will them to happen. Scrolling down, George says, is there a good example of passing the torch? I don't know about Naruto and Boruto. I really don't. Or Goku. Let's see. Luke does. Yeah. Luke is greater than Rey. I'll agree with that one, but I'm not up on all of that. So, but Spider-Man, yeah, Peter Parker is definitely better than Miles Morales. But yeah, the thing about Batman and Nightwing is that When Nightwing becomes a different character, he doesn't want to be Batman. He specifically doesn't want to be Batman. That's the difference between the older versions of that character, of Robin, and the newer versions. But yes, all the examples that you give here, the passing of the torch, for the ones I know anyways, just didn't work. But again, is there a good example? I would say yes, a good example is Wally West. And I think that's, again, part of why they tried desperately over the last even 15 years or more to kill Wally West and to make him a villain, basically, because they can't stand that people moved on. They just can't. So much, quite honestly, I'll say that I've said this over and over again. I'll say it over and over again in the future, I'm sure. But when you listen to progressives speak, everything they say is the exact opposite of what they mean. And that's why I call them quote unquote progressives. Why? Because they have zero idea of what actually progress looks like. Zero idea. Nor do they want to progress. They want to regress us into a childlike state. So that's why they do things like, tear down Wally West every step that they can. Because once again, you have Barry Allen dying a heroic death, and you have this young kid who was once Kid Flash becoming an actual adult, becoming an actual hero, growing into and progressing in his life to something more than what he was before. That's my example. Scrolling down. George also says, I mean, everything they try to pass the torch on, it fails, and they go back to the original. Again, I would say that was definitely a mistake with Barry Allen and Wally West. But at the same time, it goes back to my point that I talked about at the first. DC does have a version of this that actually works. And it is a version where they pass the torch by creating a new character within a new timeline. And that's why the original Superman still works and still can be used. And then the other Supermans, at the very least, up to the point where, I don't know, maybe into the 90s, but certainly at the time of Crisis on Infinite Earths, you can have 3-4 different Supermans in a story and have that work. Scrolling down. The Red Citadel. Thank you very much, Adurin. Red Citadel. Names always go straight out of my head the times I need them the most. Well, I've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes almost. I got to get moving on this chat. Let's see. Scrolling down. Honduran says, I don't much like the Conan stories, but Howard filling him with fear at some of the monstrosities he came across was a good part. Yeah. That's one of the Scarlet Citadel, one of the parts of the Scarlet Citadel that I really find most fascinating is it's really a description of hell. You have Conan and he's trying to get out of this dungeon and he decides to go down because he can't go up, but he's literally, I think in my reading of the story, he's literally descending into hell. And some of the descriptions that Howard has of what this hell looks like, just the top layers of it, are excruciatingly well written and make your skin crawl, which is what you want from hell when someone describes it. Scrolling down. Zektan says, RJ, just curious, do you think humans are body/soul or body, soul, spirit? Soul and spirit are the same thing. I go back to Augustine of Hippo. I go back to a lot more than Augustine of Hippo, but yeah, he made that definitive statements. Your spirit, another word for it is soul. If you go back to the ancient Greek, spirit, no, that's go back to the Latin, but you go back to the ancient Greek, pneumatos. I think if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it literally means breath, life, spirit, soul. So those things are all one. Can be used interchangeably. Let's put it that way. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Honduran says humans are body and soul, not just soul. Agreed. That's why I found, let's say, Stargate, the television show, somewhat interesting, but they do go into, I think, maniacism is what they go into, because basically at the end of it, it's like your body is an evil thing. You want to transcend it and become just a pure soul. And thinking, no, that's not exactly what it is. Our bodies are corrupted because of the way that things have played out, but they still are good in themselves, and we are body and soul. Let's see, scrolling down. See if I can get through some more of these comments. Scrolling down. I think a lot of this cross talk is not for me, but people talking to each other. So I apologize if I miss your comment to me. Let's see. Sound Engraver is saying thank you. Let me just pause here and hope that Sound Engraver is not saying thank you this far down in the chat from when I said that stuff about her channel, because that means I am so far behind in this live chat and everybody's comments that I think I would be buried here for the next 2 hours. Let's see. Scrolling down, Honduran says 80s was so cringe. As an outsider, that's my opinion of them. Yeah, they were cringe, but I mean, I think they were cringe in a way that was campy, in the fact that, again, you're trying to not exclude anyone from having a good time with this piece of entertainment. And to me, that can be overlooked. Well, I won't say overlooked. I would not count that as a detriment to what they're trying to do as storytellers. Sound Engraver says, let's see. Oh, scrolling down. Why is this not showing up? Oh, here we go. Sure. Thanks for listening. I'll keep talking about art on my Sunday streams, but my videos during the week will be music based, both educational and music performing based. Okay, good to know. Let's see. Pedro is here. Pedro says, late, but I had to say goodbye. Well, Pedro, I might be here for a while, depending on how many more comments I have to get through. Let's see, scrolling down. Rex says, why are things not showing up? Oh, there. One thing about 80s humor and silliness is that it felt more genuine. And while there's silliness today, it comes across more like they're embarrassed by it. I agree. I think that started in the 90s, quite honestly. Rex, I would say that you're hitting the nail right there on the head. It was silly and there was some silliness to it, but it was genuine. Whereas the 90s started off with, let's make fun of those people who are genuinely silly. And then it just ballooned into what we have today. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. RJ Williams is here. The other RJ. Thank you very much for showing up, RJ Williams. Nice to see you in the chat. Let's see. Oh, scrolling down. Let's see if there's any more comments from me. Oh, now I'm getting confused because people are talking to RJ, the other RJ in the chat. Honduran says, RJ, it's actually the Scarlet Citadel. My bad. You said red and threw me off when I was typing. I think there are several different names for most of the Howard stories because of the way they were published. So it is at times difficult to keep them straight in your head. Let's see. Scrolling down. Stone Engraver says, I had to mute the mention of Stargate. Love that show. Watching season 8 now with Professor Geek. First time seeing it. Very good. Professor Geek is introducing you to the great 90s sci-fi, I guess. It's 90s, right? Let's see. Honduran says, RJ, no, you skipped my 3-part Howard quote. Apologies. I'm just trying to get down. We're hitting almost an hour and a half here, so I'm trying to get to the bottom of the chat. Let's see. Tony says, RJ, are you a fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? No. I'm sorry, but I lived through the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle craze phase, and it just drove any sane person to the edge of insanity. It just did. I mean, I know, like a couple of years ago, I picked up some good Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, and I went, wow, these are actually good. But still, having to live through that insanity, that was the biggest insanity that I think I had to live through culturally, like pop culturally, was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Second would probably be when the new Star Wars prequels were about to come out. But yeah, it was just so much everywhere, sticking in your face. I had to just shut it out to stay sane. Let's see. Scrolling down. Now people are trying to keep me here by throwing up more comments. Rex says, heading to bed soon. Nice to see you all. Take care. Very good to have you here, Rex. Let's see. Michael says Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis are fantastic, and everyone should watch them. They're good sci-fi. I'll put it that way. I don't agree with their take on how the world works, but it's good sci-fi. Let's see. Honduran says, sorry for all the messages, keeping you on the stream so long. No, that's okay. I'm here to interact with people. That's what I do, but I just need to cut it short as close to the hour as possible because I do have a lot of other things to do in my day. Let's see. Scrolling down. Rex says, I missed his comment between Lovecraft and Howard. Unfortunate. I'm sorry about that, Rex. Let's see. Scrolling down. I think we'll give the final word to Sound Engraver. She says, and love Stargate Atlantis, as Michael says. Yeah. Quite honestly, Stargate, I'm going to switch off the comments now. So I don't see any more pop up. I'm going to give you my Crom the Destroyer minute and a half trailer at the end, but I'll say this, give that last bit to Sound Engraver and talk about Stargate. Stargate as a show was always on. And I never truly got into it. I watched episode here and episode there. I never really watched the entire thing until Stargate Atlantis come on. And then I started watching Stargate Atlantis and I liked it so much that I went back and watched the entire full series of the other Stargate instead of, just knowing little bits here and there. So that was my interest into it as well. All right. I want to thank everyone for showing up in the chat. And I want to give a big thank you to Sound Engraver for her super chat. Thank you very much. And for sticking around for this entire hour and a half. If you've been here, thank you for everyone. Just a quick mention to anybody who is running across my stream. There are links in the description for my graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels, and my sword and sorcery low fantasy graphic novel, Crom the Destroyer, of which I will play the trailer for in just a moment. And before I do that, once again, say thank you to everyone for showing up, and I will see you either on Saturday with my normal Saturday videos or next week here on Comic Book Team Up with John's Longbox. All right, I'll see y'all later. Bye.
An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled. Our heart has returned, and the world will burn.